Good afternoon. Today I'm going to present the recent events and our observations regarding them, human rights defenders' work and the results. We'll speak about the current trends and violations from the side of Azerbaijani militants. As of today, let me present you some statistics. As of today, we have registered since 27th of September at least 37 civilian deaths and 118 civilians wounded. One of the wounded persons has been the recent wounding was registered this night in Avetaranots village as a result of Azerbaijani missile shooting. Let me also dwell upon the damages caused to the civilian infrastructure. 10,500 private households, shops, etc. have been either wounded, either partially or completely destroyed as of our data. Over 1,500 infrastructural facilities has been partially destroyed or fully destroyed, including the civil manufacturing enterprises and production enterprises, and also over 1,500 vehicles have been destroyed. I mean civilian vehicles. These figures are approximate and they need further precision. Depending on the scope, depending on the continued military actions, we still need to clarify the precise data and will present them later on. These are approximate data, as I told you. As for casualties and wounded civilians, we have preliminary data on some civilians dying, especially in those areas where the diversion groups of Azerbaijanis have been entering these areas. However, again, caused by the ongoing military warfare, it is really challenging to present you the final precise data. Nevertheless, the risk is still great considering Hadrut cases, the murdering of 2 civilians. This is something that Azerbaijani social media published a video on. There's a great risk of having more similar cases because we have lost and missing civilians from this area, according to our data. Also, considering the obvious style of acting, which has been proven by multiple evidences, and this is something the Azerbaijanis have adopted, again, there's still a great danger that these civilians died or they were subject to violence or a number of other violent actions. Now, as we speak about the developments in the recent days, let me mention that Azerbaijan has been continuously bombing, doing missile shootings and aviation bombings in a number of our communities. Usually, on regular basis, they subject to shootings the cities of Martuni, Martakert, and the villages and communities adjacent to them, as well as some areas of Hadrut are every now and then subject to missile shooting and air shooting. Also, at a certain regularity, Stepanakert is being subject to shootings. You are probably aware of the events happening yesterday night and evening. and according to the data, missiles of Polonez type have been deployed there, and exclusively civilian targets were targeted. Residential communities, civilian infrastructure, and production areas, production facilities have been targeted. In particular, households have been damaged, a large diameter gas pipeline has been damaged, and some production enterprises have been damaged too. From these events that happened yesterday, it became obvious that this attack was purposeful, it was pre-planned, and it is fully qualified as a war crime according to the Geneva Convention. Luckily, there have been no wounded civilians or casualties, but we have a lot of material damage registered. The rest is yet to be clarified, precise, and we will present it later. In the cities of Martuni and Martakert, as I've already mentioned, every now and then the civilian infrastructure is being targeted. Again, we mainly register material damage because civilians are cautious. They realize how great the risk is, and they mainly stay underground, and that's why in the number of human losses, casualties is going down. We don't have a trend of its growth, so to say. There's another challenge, another problem that I want to raise. In recent days, in Azerbaijani social media, they spread intensively different photos and videos that are mainly containing true data, not fake data, according to our analysis. And in these photos and videos, they present different war crimes and also inhuman attitude towards corpses and towards the captured civilians, including cases of decapitation and also military hostages. There's an attempt to make them, let's say, publicly interesting. From a number of videos published yesterday, it is obvious that Azerbaijanis are with high rate of probability using psychological and physical violence towards our hostages, so that they could be presented in, they could be used in raising Azerbaijani positions publicly. This is again unacceptable and is again a violation of the international humanitarian law and Geneva Convention. From this perspective, it is of great importance for the international community to pay the keenest attention to these cases, so that further similar violations would be avoided and the protection of our hostages and their rights could be done in Azerbaijan, and any further violations towards the corpses of our militaries could be stopped. In this context, it's important to highlight that Azerbaijan already twice refused to maintain ceasefire, as a result of which a great number of Armenian and Azerbaijani corpses cannot be taken away from the battlefield, and they cannot be even exchanged, and these corpses cannot be taken to their families, which is an inhuman treating of those deaths, deceased persons. And once again, I want to draw the attention of the international community to this fact, because there's an impression that Azerbaijan is intentionally ignoring all the urges to the ceasefire, because they have a lot lot of casualties, a lot of deaths, and they do not want these deaths to be known to the families of those deceased militants because it can cause a big wave of rage in Azerbaijani society. There is another trend, alarming trend that I want to mention. Just like in the past, in the same way now, currently, Azerbaijani forces are trying to target the roads of vital importance and other civilian infrastructure in Artsakh to make the humanitarian disaster deeper in Artsakh. In particular, yesterday, you are probably aware that missile attacks have been made on Berdzor, the city of Berdzor, and this illustrates their urge to try and ruin this way, this road connecting Armenia and Artsakh. They try to keep it under shootings to try and stop communication between both countries, which, as you understand, has a great humanitarian importance. There's another circumstance to mention. Azerbaijani propaganda machine and Azerbaijani authorities in recent days started to circulate propaganda media materials about positive attitude towards Armenians, possibility of peaceful coexistence, possibility to see Artsakh within Azerbaijan. This, of course, deserves a scornful skepticism because it is the population of Artsakh to live, to decide how they want to live on, with the support of Armenian nation, of course, because we are the owners of our land. We are the ones who decide our destiny, and we are the ones who decide the destiny of our homeland. Therefore, there's no way we can speak about living within Azerbaijan. This is excluded, absolutely. First of all, because we have the ultimate right to live on our land, and secondly, during decades, Azerbaijani authorities have been persistently manifesting such a policy that they deepened the level of hatred in their society to the extent that it is impossible for both nations to coexist peacefully in the foreseeable future. By saying peaceful coexistence, I mean even communication, irrespective of the status, is impossible. And vivid manifestation to this is the hatred, the huge wave of hatred towards Armenians that we see during this war, including the ones that we see during military actions and the ones manifested in social media when they publish a photo or video of our hostages and corpses. We see the inhuman attitude they manifest, and we see how joyful Azerbaijanis are about it. That's why this propaganda of hatred should be stopped as soon as possible if they are even thinking of being our neighbors. And this is something an international community should be concerned about because it is responsible for this whole thing. The international community is responsible because it has been obvious for decades that this hatred propaganda can erupt one day and can cause a very grave humanitarian disaster in the whole region. I'd like to mention briefly that during this period, Human Rights Defender team continues collecting evidence. Also, we presented separate reports, and in my previous press conference, I mentioned that there's one closed report that we presented to the relevant international agencies regarding inhuman attitude, and very soon we'll prepare and submit the second closed report. We have also published the Saint All Saviors Church in Shushi and an open report regarding this church and the way it was handled. The relevant human rights organizations received our report, and it is obvious that this was an attempt to cause spiritual damage to our nation, to a church that has a special symbolic significance to our people. Well, this is it. We keep collecting the evidence, and we will update you whenever we have any other new information. Thank you. If you have questions, please, I'm open. Armenia TV channel. I'd like to ask you to tell us, are there any precedents in the recent human history to these kind of military crimes? Are there any crimes of this kind where we can see the Turkish trace or the Turkish handwriting in place? Well, I can't give you a professional comparison now because I haven't been conducting a detailed research of these conflicts in what concerns the war crimes. However, the fact that the Turkish trace is in these crimes is obvious is an undoubtful fact. It can be seen both in Syrian battles and a similar attitude that was manifested there, in particular decapitation, inhuman attitude to hostages, different propaganda, and unacceptable ways of making it, psychological terror towards our society, so on and so forth. However, the most important Turkish trace that we can definitely visualize is that involving terroristic groups and mercenaries from Turkey and elsewhere, there's a purpose to commit genocidal acts towards Artsakh population. This is something Turkey has been consistently conducting throughout its history towards Armenians and other nations, and is now committing in the Middle East. I'd like to hear your advice and recommendations to the social media users. What would you recommend to the active social media users? What kind of attitude, what kind of right attitude should they manifest towards the cases of military war crimes? What would you recommend? Based on your experience, of course. My main recommendation and my biggest request is that the materials published by Azerbaijani propaganda social media shouldn't be brought into Armenian media, because with high rate of probability they contain propaganda spirit, and they are bad for Armenian audience and for our spirit, including they have horrible materials on their war crimes, and it's good if our audience doesn't see it, because their goal is to bring fear into our hearts and deprive us from the confidence towards our army and our battle. If we keep this media hygiene in place, it would be much more difficult for them to commit psychological diversions towards our society, and most importantly, trust to the official sources. And if there's any piece of information, try to cross-check it and double-check it with several sources, including the official ones, and only after that they can be credible. Is that all? All right, thank you for your attention.